All right, we are now live. Anything you say can and will be held against you in the court of law. Are you listening? All right now, we are going out to literally anyone in the world right now who could be listening.
Happy birthday, Julia.
Today's Julia's birthday.
Yeah.
Happy birthday, Julia. Do you want to sing?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Happy, we have to sing to Dina.
Wait, Dina's
Her
birthday was
was
yesterday.
Yeah. We have to sing to her.
Okay, so we can sing happy birthday. Ladies, are you gonna do this or not?
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna sing to Julia and Dina. Go. You can sing this if you like.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday to you.
I got even when you finish it, sometimes you gotta read it out.
Whoa, we sure are lively after our little mini break. All right, the Great War. President Wilson called it war to end all war.
Bam.
Yes, Sam. Whoa. Be here now, right, Casey? The war to end all wars. Why did he call it that? Because again, history builds on itself, right? These things don't happen in a vacuum. President Wilson is a product of the progressive era, the product of this, which was a product of the Enlightenment, which is a product of rational movement that meant we humans can basically fix anything and everything. All things that are wrong with the world can be solved by human intellect, David. And therefore, if America is going to enter this war that's all over Europe, that's now being called a world war, gentlemen, it's going to be the war to end all wars, because humanity is progressing and evolving to the point where this is going to be the final nail, so to speak, in this whole idea that we solve our problems with violence and war. Humanity has evolved beyond that. That's President Wilson's kind of thinking, this progressive mindset, that we're beyond this idea that we have to solve problems with violence. Remember, he was it starts with an I. President Wilson was an idealist. He thought, maybe naively, probably naively, that, the idea of American democracy, if that would just take hold throughout the world, then there wouldn't be any wars, because America is an exceptional country, and our form of democracy, if that was available and on all people had that, what would be the reason to have war? We'd all be trading freely with each other. We'd all be in harmony, because this whole idea of freedom and liberty would be all over the world. That's a very idealistic way of looking at it. It's not realistic, though, is it? Because we know from God's word that, listen, as long as this dirt ball, as long as we're in this earth, there's always going to be war. That doesn't mean we ever stop striving to bring peace, right? We're called to be peacemakers, but we have to realize that we live in a sinful, fallen place. So he called it the war to end all wars, and he also said that the reason we're entering this war, because he tried to keep us out of it, right, is to remember this quote. I don't know if it's in your notes. Is this quote in your notes? To make the world safe for democracy. Is that in your notes? Well, we'll get to it. If it's not in there, I'll have you write it in at the appropriate time. He's an idealist, but he notices, or he faces right away after becoming president, we got to deal with violent people. There's all kinds of things going on to the south of us in Mexico. There's revolutions. There's people that are taking power in Mexico that aren't very good people, murderous people. They kill American citizens. he's got to do something about that. This idealist world that he wants to create isn't real. There's not, people don't share that. So he's got to deal with problems in Mexico and the Dominican and Haiti. I gave you those, did anybody not get those handouts? I gave you 2 handouts last week. Causes of World War I and then Theaters of War. Anybody not get either one? This one, which I think we filled in, right? Fill in the blanks. And this one that we highlighted. Okay, now why did I give you these? Because if we were in world history, we would be doing a much more in-depth study of the actual war itself. The United States doesn't enter the war until 1917. In fact, the United States doesn't really enter the war as far as our army until spring of 1918. The war started in 1914. The war's going to be over 6 months after we get there. Does that make sense? So there's not a whole lot of like battles like we did the Civil War or we would do with World War II that we, hey, American soldiers in the battlefield. No, there's not a whole lot of that because we got there in time to help. We were very influential in the outcome, but we didn't really do a whole lot of fighting. We were there, let's see, if the war went on for 4 years and we were only there half a year, we were there for what, 12% of the year of the war. So I gave you these notes and these just as a skeletal view, a 60,000-foot view of, hey, this is what was going on in World War I. This is how it started. These were the players, the alliances. These were the main causes and the alliances that were formed that caused that domino effect, or what do I have up there? Not dominoes, but web of war that caused all of these different countries to be entangled with each other in this war because of their alliances. We talked about how when it began, you had some people in Europe that were like, hey, this is like, we're going to play a football game. Like, let's have a parade. Our boys are going to go fight, and it's going to be over quick. Remember, especially Germany with their Schlieffen plan, they thought it was going to be done quick. We're going to take Paris like that. And then we'll focus on Russia, and between us and Austria-Hungary, because of our military preparedness, we'll take them down, and this war is going to be over. We will achieve what we want. Others, like Lord Grey in Great Britain, said, you know what? Lights are going out all over Europe, and we won't see them lit again in our lifetime. And there were maps. That's the alliances. Just keep you up on geography. Okay, can America stay neutral? We sure tried. And the big event in 1915, which I think we discussed, can you imagine that happening today? Am I the only one that thinks that if that happened today, most of Americans would have said, we got to go bomb that place? Am I right? And 100 years ago, most Americans were like, I still don't want to be involved in this war. What do we have? What's our interest over there? Why are we going 3,000 miles away to fight and risk our brothers, sons, fathers for their war? So we tried to stay out of it. And he kept us out of war, got him elected. What was the key state in that election, Caleb? What state stood out to us when we looked at that electoral map like, whoa, if it wasn't for that state, Hughes would have won. Some guy we never heard of. Ohio. Amazing. And who's 16? When you vote, can you believe you're going to vote 2024? Are you excited? Wait, you didn't just turn 16 last week. Did you? Who turned 16 before November? You get to vote in the 2024 election. In a state that almost always determines who the winner is. That's a whole other show. We're having that. All right. Yeah. Can we train our bladders differently? Go ahead. All right. Our intervention is inevitable, it appears, right? When we look back, it was like America really tried to stay out of, as David strike two. America really tried to stay out of this, but as we look back, we're like, it was inevitable. America was eventually going to have to join, right? Things were, the war was dragging on. Our allies really wanted us involved in the war. And then we left off with these things. Why did America finally almost have to enter? Well, one, the Germans, after Lusitania, after the Sussex, they started up again. Like, hey, that might be a merchant ship. You might just be involved in trade. There might be passengers on it, civilians. Guess what? We don't care. If we see you, if we feel that you're supplying Great Britain, France, or Russia with any supplies, we're just going to blow your ship out of the water. So what was America supposed to do? Continue? Was America just supposed to say, okay, we're not going to trade with our partners anymore, and give in to that threat? And then we had this, the Zimmerman telegram. This is a big part of why America finally joined the battle against Germany. Germany was trying to instigate Mexico to cause problems with the United States, to divert our attention to our homeland. Germans already knew Americans didn't want to go to war, right? And now, if we had problems with Mexico trying to reassert themselves, remember, it wasn't that long ago. When you go back to 1916, it was only, it was like one generation away from the Mexican-American War, where we gained all that territory from New Mexico, Texas to California. Remember that? Well, Germany was telling Mexico, hey, if you help us out here, we'll be able to help you reclaim all that territory you lost to the Americans in the Mexican-American War. And that message was sent from Germany to Mexico and got intercepted. And President Wilson, it was intercepted by the British, and President Wilson got that information. Wow. So all these things added up. Oh, money's always involved, right? Mackenzie, we wish love made the world go round, but unfortunately, it always comes back to money. Okay, one phrase you'll hear your whole adult life is follow the money, unfortunately. Like, hey, why did that happen? Somebody will say, follow the money. And you'll find out why certain things happen. We wish it wasn't so, but that's how it is. Our allies at this point owe us, I don't know what happened to the ON. I'm not trying to be fancy there, speak slang. Our allies owed us over $2 billion. So how are we ever gonna, we can't afford really to let them lose when it comes to money. All caught up? Ready to roll now? Are we prepared? So, when it comes to entering this war, we decided we have to do, by the way, I don't think do I have the date that we entered the war? April 1917, if you want to put that in the margin. Or if you want to put that right next to the heading, American Preparedness. America declares war on Germany. I can't believe that's not in there. America declares war on Germany, April 1917. This is not going to do. I'm not helping you by allowing you not to take notes. No, David, that doesn't fly. April 1917. The war's already been going on for 2.5 years. Into its third year. Well into its third year, before we actually declare war on Germany. By the way, those of you that are 16 in a couple years, you will. Is it locked? Did you unlock it? Did you unlock it?
I think it's good.
In a couple years, when you turn 18, you'll have to register with something called selective service. I think they might do it automatically. So when you turn 18, you will be registered with the U.S. government as eligible for the draft. Now, when it first was instituted, it was 21 to 30-year-olds. In 1917, the original draft was any male, 21 to 30 years old, were automatically put into the system, and you could be drafted into the military. You know what's amazing? In 2021, we don't have a draft. Do you realize that we were fighting a war your whole life? Do you know that your country has been at war your whole life until last month? Did you know that? Did you even realize that? I mean, you might have kind of knew it. You've heard of Afghanistan, right? Did you know we're involved in a war? Like our military for 20 years was involved in this war on terror in Iraq and Afghanistan and other places. But we, as Americans, we didn't even like, really? What we're going to see what was going on in World War I, what a difference in that generation compared to ours, the sacrifices that had to be made, because what Americans, what did I sacrifice while on this war on terror? Honestly, nothing. Isn't that weird? I mean, usually throughout history, when your nation's at war, it's like the whole country is something necessarily. And add to that point that there wasn't a draft. Our current military is all made up of, if you don't feel thankful for a whole lot, we just got to thanks. By the way, Thanksgiving weekend's over, so you spent all that time probably at every dinner you did. Maybe not at every dinner, but maybe at your dinner with family. Everybody said they're thankful for. Anybody do that, right? So is that over now? Have you ever heard of Thanksgiving? You never heard of Thanksgiving? What's Thanksgiving? We just ended Thanksgiving weekend. Yay! Everybody, we had 3 days off school, right? It's time for everybody to pause and give thanks for all the blessings in their life. Well, what's Thanksgiving, sir? I mean, what do you think I mean by that? I didn't make it up.
Like living with a thankful heart.
Like always, right? Like we're not just going to pause at Thanksgiving. We're going to live a life of thanksgiving. We spend every day giving thanks, right, Sid? It's a way of life for us. It's not just like, hey, let's stop all of our selfish endeavors and let's stop and give thanks. No, we live like that every day. True? I hope. That's what we are striving to do, I hope. Anyway, how did I get to that? The idea that going to war in today's world, in our generation, doesn't take any sacrifice from us at all. And the fact that we have a volunteer army, everyone that is serving now to protect American freedom isn't doing it because they were drafted. They're volunteering. Isn't that awesome? Of course, they're getting paid. But the point is, the government's not calling them into service. They're going into service on their own volition. Pretty awesome. In 1918, America said, well, we're not going to have enough men. If we're going to go into this war, who knows how long it's going to last. They expanded the draft from 18 to 45. Originally, it was 21-year-olds. Now it's 18-year-olds. And now it's up to 45-year-olds. They made it 21 to 30 because they're like, well, we want our fittest, our best, right? Prime of life kind of deal. Think of athletics. In your 20s, that's when you're, unless you're Tom Brady, that's when you're at your athletic prime, your physical prime. They expanded it to 45. 45-year-old in 1916 wasn't Tom Brady, 45. 45 was like middle age. 45 then would be almost like 65 now. Does that make sense? I mean, really would be. Well, eventually 2.8 million people were drafted, or men were drafted into the United States military. Only a little over 1 million went to combat. I really shouldn't even say combat. Saw action. In other words, they were called to duty to go across the pond and participate in the war. It doesn't necessarily mean they were on the front lines, on the field of battle. Because of course you got clerical people. Were we ready? No, we weren't ready. We had to throw together boot camps. Like, hey, let's construct we had very little supplies. Teddy Roosevelt, remember Macho Man Teddy, very militaristic minded, right? Rough Rider, Teddy Roosevelt, hero of the Spanish-American War. He went and visited one of the training centers, the boot camps for getting our men ready for World War I. He was like disgusted. He couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. They were training with broomsticks because they didn't have the artillery. We've declared war. We're no way ready for war. I mean, look, we were spending the whole time thinking we're not going to have to get into it. Now, we were prepared enough that we were always, like, we have an army, we have a navy. If someone was to attack the United States, the idea was the United States would be able to defend itself. Were we ready for a world war? Were we ready to send millions of troops across the ocean to fight in Europe? No, we weren't. So we had to hastily put this together. What about our industry? Again, men were training with broomsticks instead of rifles. It's necessary to train them for actual live war. Well, American industry had to convert to, hey, we've got to make ammunition. We've got to supply more. Then our factories have to be converted to military production. Well, that doesn't happen overnight. In 1916 or 1917, it doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen overnight anytime. Except I will give a shameless plug to the previous administration. President Trump did, in pretty quick order, turn some of our automobile factories into ventilator production. Remember that? Anybody remember that? Mm-hmm. Fifth grade, do you remember hearing the term Hoovervilles? No. Once again, nothing. Fifth grade, just a blur. Man, so disappointing. Hoover is going to be president 15 years from now, from this time, in the Great Depression. Hoovervilles were the term they gave to all these people out of work in shanty towns. Took all the scrap metal and cardboard that the families could live under. Because they blame, listen, if you're the president and the economy goes bad, who gets blamed? The president. Kind of like the quarterback on a football team. Who gets all the credit when the economy's good? President. Does that necessarily mean the president did something great? Not necessarily. Hooverizing. He was put in charge of something called the Food Administration. Part of the bill was for food and fuel. How are we going to make sure that our soldiers have enough food and fuel to fight this war? If we're sending our boys across the pond, we've got to make sure they're equipped with everything they need. And this gets to what I was talking about 10 minutes ago. How much sacrifice did I make or your families make, unless you had a person in your family that went to the Mideast to fight the war on terror? How much sacrifice did most Americans make? None. We didn't have any heatless, meatless, or sweetless days. You know what that means? Think about it. Heatless, meatless, sweetless. What that meant was, part of Hooverizing the country was, the idea was, on Mondays, no Americans will have meat at dinner. What? No chicken, no pork, no beef. Not even in your tacos. Oh, it's Tuesday. Meatless Mondays. What's the idea behind that? If all Americans that would usually, we're a meat and potatoes kind of country, right? If all Americans would not eat meat on Monday, the idea was that we didn't eat as families on Monday would go to the soldiers, the war effort. On Wednesdays, no bread. Bread's a pretty big staple in the American diet, right? Most of you, almost every dinner, have rolls or something, some kind of bread. Am I right? At some point, right? Some wheatless days, wheatless Wednesdays. Sweetless isn't on there, but there would be sweetless days. There would be heatless days. Hey, can you sacrifice going one day, even in today's weather? I mean, Northeast gets pretty cold, right? In today's weather, could your family sacrifice? Here's the question: would your family sell your house for one day a week? We can have that need today, or are we living in a world where resources are so plentiful today that we wouldn't have to do it? But my question, I guess, is would we? Some of you are kind of like, who's the big, I guess, is would we? Some of you are kind of like, who's the big Dunkin' people in here? You just got to have your Dunkin', like caramel, whatever you're like. What if you just couldn't have it one day a week?
What?
Could you do it? Could you handle it? You handle no sweets one day a week, no heat in your house, no on Monday house on your property, and this still goes on today. This is kind of like these war bonds, Liberty loans they were called. That's in italics. What you're doing is you're loaning money to the United States government, and in this case, for the purpose of fighting the war. Isaac says, hey, I want a $50 bond, U.S. bond. What that means is a bond. It's a pact. It's an agreement, right? I'm going to spend $50 and buy this bond. That $50 is going to be used for the war effort. I'm going to get a piece of paper, a certificate that says I paid $50. Now, the idea is that I'm going to earn back a small amount of interest. Like when I cash that bond in down the road, I'm going to get more than 50. See how it's a win-win? The war effort, $17 billion and deal, right? Now, if I bought a war bond, most people aren't buying it expecting to get rich off of it. $50 when you cash in your bond. There's a chance you might get less, but you'll probably get more. But even if you didn't, okay, what if you went to war and everybody had to pay $100? You know there would be Americans that would be pretty mad about that. Do you agree? Well, part of it would be reasonable bad because we pay so much taxes, right? Because remember what the tax rate was? Anybody remember? Did we talk about that in this class? What was the tax rate in when the 16th Amendment was first passed? What was the tax rate?
1%.
And how many people paid it? Not very many, right? By the way, that's not in your notes, but another thing that's happening as far as change in America as we're going to World War I and our preparedness and not having the funding, so we have to do these Liberty bonds. We won't get into it a whole lot, but I think it's in future notes. The tax rate went way up. Tax rate skyrocketed. Remember it was, oh, we'll have the income tax, but don't worry, it's going to only be 1%, and very few of you are going to pay. Boy, that changed in a hurry. It's been with us ever since. We were supposed to watch a little excerpt. We'll get not even as far as they did with. Anybody remember Alvin York from 5th grade?
No.
Not much time, but this excerpt will start today. We'll end tomorrow with the end of this. This man is a devout Christian. It's World War I. He's been called to war. I wrote on the board a term here called conscientious objector. There was a clause in the selective service that said, if you have a really strong religious reason why you cannot participate in war, that there's a possibility that you can appeal to the government and you wouldn't have to go to war because your conscience wouldn't allow you. He's that kind of guy. He's like, you want me to go to war to kill people? Now, the background is he's one of the best marksmen in the country. And he's going to be a teacher to other people how to be good marksmen and use the rifle. So he's conflicted. What do I do here? My country's calling me. By the way, you see the title, Render Unto Caesars? That's from the Bible, when Christ tells, hey, do we have to keep paying taxes to these Romans? And Christ's response was, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, right? He asked whose image is on him.
Private York reporting, sir.
Yes, York, Eddie. York, Captain Danforth has just handed me a report concerning you, made by your company. You have a very excellent camp record.
Wonder glad to hear that, sir.
You applied for exemption, I believe, as a conscientious objector.
Yes, sir.
Well, I think we can disregard that. York, Sergeant Parsons recommends your promotion to the rank of corporal with special detail as instructor in target practice. Captain Danforth and I heartily approve.
I congratulate you, York. Well, I'm much obliged to you, Major Buxton and Captain Danforth. Well, I learned them fellas to shoot the best I can, like I already done, Pusher and Burt. I mean, Privates Ross and Thomas, but, well, I don't want to be no corporal.
What's that?
I said, I don't want to be no corporal.
Why not? Wait a minute, Captain, let him talk.
Well, you see,
Is it because of your religious convictions, York?
yes, sir, that's it. You see, I believe in the Bible, and I'm believing that this here life we're living is something the Lord didn't give us. And we got to be living it the best we can. And I'm figuring that killing other folks ain't no part of what He was intended for us to be a doing here.
In a way, I agree with you.
York, with your permission, Major.
Certainly, Captain. Sit down, York.
You believe in the Bible? Yes, sir. Well, I do too. But do you believe that the Bible means that a man shouldn't fight the way he believes to be right? Well, it done said, blessed are the peacemakers. Yes, I know, but you remember that verse, I think it's in Luke, where he says, he that hath no sword, let him sell his garment and buy one? He said that to Peter. But he done stop Peter from using the sword. He said, them that lives by the sword will be a perishing by the sword. That, further on. Yes, I remember, but go ahead, Captain. But according to St. John, he said, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then would my servant fight. Well, that's just the point, Captain. He done said his kingdom were not of this world. And that is different. Yes, but
Just a moment, Captain. York, have you ever read this?
history of the United States. Yeah, I'm sure not right. Daniel Boone.
Yeah. You know about him?
Everybody down there knows about Daniel Boone. First man into the Valley of the Three Forks.
And he was quite a man. One of the greatest. And that book's full of great men.
All right, we'll pick up there tomorrow. I don't know why we're not getting the belts. Lights, please. I'm not gonna be able to-
It is sponsored. We'll change it to 5.
What's that?
Maybe if we have